They handed you a list of things that are wrong with you: distractible, too sensitive, scattered, unable to do the small, ordinary things everyone else seems to manage without effort. And some part of you believed it. But watch what your mind does the moment it finally meets something that matters to it. That is not a broken machine. There is a name for what that is. There is a kind of person who has always been here. They go by different names in different centuries: the cunning woman, the hermit, the witness, the seer, the exile. The world has tried more than once to be rid of them. The world has never managed it. If you carry one of these patterns, you already know. Today the mind they called disordered, the Sigma INFJ Brain, wired a particular way, and not by accident. You know the experience even if you have never had the words for it. You can lose 8 hours inside a single question and forget that food exists. Then you cannot open one piece of post for 3 weeks. You can hold an entire conversation from 5 years ago in perfect detail and lose your keys twice before leaving the house. You are capable of startling depth and everyday incompetence in the same afternoon. And the world has an explanation ready for this. The explanation is that something is wrong with you. For most of your life, that explanation has come dressed in clinical language: a deficit of attention, a disorder, a spectrum you might sit somewhere on, a set of symptoms to be managed. And I want to be careful here, because that explanation is not simply cruel or empty. It captures something real. The friction is real. The exhaustion is real. The days when the simplest task feels like moving through wet concrete are real, and no one should tell you otherwise. If the clinical frame gave you relief or language or support that helped, keep it. It reached something true. But you already sense where it stops, because the same word, disorder, is asked to describe both the struggle and the person. And those are not the same thing. You have probably spent years quietly wondering why, if your mind is so broken, it also does the things it does, why it sees what others miss, why it arrives at the answer before it can show the working. That wondering is not denial. It is your own perception telling you the story is incomplete. So let us actually look at it. Not the comfortable version, the real one. Start with the attention. They call it a deficit, as though the capacity was simply missing, but it is not missing. You have watched it burn for hours on the thing that gripped you. What you have is not an absence of attention. It is attention that answers to meaning rather than to instruction. It goes where significance is, and it will not be marched somewhere arbitrary on command. That is not a broken version of ordinary focus. It is a different mechanism entirely, and the word deficit cannot hold it. Take the sensitivity next. Too much, they say, too easily overwhelmed. But look at what is actually happening in a crowded room. You are not receiving the same signal as everyone else and coping badly. You are receiving far more signal, the tension no one has named, the mood under the words, the thing the other person will say in 6 months and does not yet know they are thinking. You are processing more, not failing to process less. Calling that oversensitivity is like calling a wider lens a defect because it lets in more light. And here is the move that matters most. The word disorder assumes a norm. It measures you against a standard design and marks the distance as damage. But you were never built to that standard design. You are being judged as a faulty version of a mind you do not have, rather than a working version of the mind you do. The distress you feel is real, but watch where it actually comes from. It is not the wiring failing, it is the friction between your wiring and a world arranged for different wiring. That is a profoundly different diagnosis. One locates the fault in you. The other locates it in the fit. You have felt that friction your whole life. The 9 to 5 that felt like a cage. The systems that made no sense and that you were told to follow anyway. The exhaustion after ordinary socializing that others seem to walk away from untouched. None of that was you failing at being normal. It was the cost of running a different architecture inside a structure that was never shaped for it. That is the thread, and it leads somewhere specific, so let me name it plainly now that the ground is clear. What you have been calling a disorder is a design. The mind you carry is what Jung would have recognized as introverted intuition running as the dominant function, nigh-dominant cognition. A brain organized for pattern, depth and synthesis rather than for sequence, surface and consistency. And the naming is not the end of it, because if this is design and not defect, then every year you spent trying to file yourself down into an ordinary shape was not treatment. It was a slow erasure of the exact thing that made you perceptive. That is the cost you have already paid, without anyone telling you the bill was optional. This is the same architecture the ancients kept naming, and the modern world keeps pathologizing. The seer who perceived what others could not, the one consulted before the decision, then feared for what they saw, not magic, not prophecy. Our dominant cognition, operating at full capacity, reading patterns the surface mind cannot access, and arriving at knowings it cannot immediately explain. The neurodivergent frame and the archetypal frame are pointing at the same mind from two directions. One says your brain is built differently, the other says it always has been in every century, and the world has never known what to do with it. There is a shadow in this, and I have watched it for a long time. When a mind built for depth is told it is broken, it learns to hide, it masks, it performs the ordinary version and buries the real one. And the masking is the true injury, far more than any trait ever was, not the wiring but the years of pretending the wiring away. The tending this mind needs is not correction, it is permission to run as it was designed to run. So the question you started with was never really the right one. It was not, what is wrong with me? It was, what am I actually built for? And what has it cost me not to know? You do not have a disorder to be fixed. You have an architecture to be understood, and finally to be lived from. Nothing was ever missing. You were reading a design as a defect, because that is the only word you were handed. You were not born wrong, you were born perceptive, in a world that punishes perception, and knowing that does not fix the friction. But it changes who you think you are inside it. That is the whole of it. If this has landed where it needed to, you may already know what comes next. There are 7 Sigma INFJ archetypes, and each one carries a different gift, a different burden, a different mythic responsibility. The link in the description will take you to a free assessment that reveals yours. It takes about 3 minutes. The answer tends to land harder than people expect. And if you want to keep walking these threads with me into the deeper psychology of the Sigma INFJ, into the archetypes the world has forgotten how to name, subscribe, there are far older and stranger things still to uncover. Until next time, find your power, know your myth,